We had the greatest economy in the history of our country.
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world. I don't know anybody else who thinks he had the greatest economy in the world. He had the largest tax cut in American history. He raised a deficit larger than any president has in any one term. He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began.
And it was probably the worst administration in history. There's never been. It was the most embarrassing day in the history of our country's life, because the tax cut spurred the greatest economy that we've ever seen, much better than just about any other country. The country was going like never before.
He had the largest national debt of any president in a 4-year period.
We have a border that's the most dangerous place anywhere in the world, considered the most dangerous place anywhere in the world. We had the safest border in the history of our country. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now. We had the safest border in history. We had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. The two greatest terrorists, biggest terrorists anywhere in the world. People are coming in and they're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen. They're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen before. There's nobody that's taken better care of our soldiers than I have.
We've done more for veterans than any president has in American history. American history. They're doing more for veterans than ever before in our history.
They think he's the worst commander-in-chief that we've ever had. Embarrassment, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. For the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan, I don't think there's ever been anything like it. He's the greatest salesman ever. I said Trump did the most incredible job I've ever seen. On January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever.
No president's ever spoken like that before. No president in our history has spoken like that before.
And we took in more money in the last 2 weeks than we've ever taken in the history of any campaign. I don't think any campaign has ever taken. The worst president, the worst presidency in the history of our country.
The fact of the matter is there's more small black businesses that have been started than any time in history.
The worst in our history.
We put more police on the street than any administration has.
It was a great idea. It's one of the most successful economic development acts ever in the country. We had the best numbers ever. I had the best environmental numbers ever.
I passed the most extensive climate change legislation in history. One of the largest polluters in the world.
I've never seen such anger in our country before.
There's a reason why we have the fastest growing economy in the world, the reason why we have the most successful economy in the world. We're doing better than any other nation in the world. And by the way, worst president in history, him the worst president in the history of the United States of America.
The most embarrassing moment in the history of our country that's allowed us to have the worst border in the history of the world. He is the worst president. He's the worst president in the history of our country. He is the worst in history by far.
We are the most admired country in the world. We have the finest military in the history of the world, the finest in the history of the world, who's the worst president in American history, best to worst. They said he was the worst in all of American history.
They rate him the worst, and they rate me one of the best. I will be the best. I think I'll be the best. Nobody's ever created an economy like us. Nobody ever cut taxes like us. The worst president in history by far.
You had the largest deficit of any president in American history.
We now have the largest deficit in the history of our country under this guy. We have the largest deficit with China, but he's got the largest deficit in the history of our country, and he's got the worst situation with China. We had the 2.5, almost 3 years of like nobody's ever had before, any country, in every way. We bought the certain dog that's the most incredible thing that you've ever seen. The worst thing I've ever seen, at numbers that nobody's ever seen. But the number of drugs coming across our border now is the largest we've ever had by far.
I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. We're the envy of the world. We're the most progressive country in the world in getting things done. We're the strongest country in the world.
That's the biggest lie. He's a sixth handicap of all. You would say it's one of the strongest statements you've ever seen. In front of, I believe, the largest crowd I've ever spoken to. We got the largest tax cut in history, the largest regulation cut in history. All of the things that we've done, nobody's never seen anything like that. That's why I had the highest approval rating in the history of the VA.